Officials in the US and China are in Sweden for a fresh round of talks that could see them extend a détente on trade beyond the deadline set for the middle of next month.
Third talks between the Vice Premier of China and the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who will be here over the next couple of hours in Stockholm.
In the heart of Stockholm, where the summer light lingers and the air carries a quiet tension, diplomats from the United States and China convene for a high-stakes round of trade negotiations. The date is August 1st, 2025, and the clock is ticking toward August 12th, when a fragile 90-day tariff truce is set to expire. The outcome of these talks could reshape global markets, influence consumer prices, and redefine alliances in an era where economic leverage is wielded like a blunt instrument. This is no ordinary diplomatic dance. It's a clash of titans, with the world's two largest economies grappling over power, trust, and the future of global trade. The stakes are not just economic but existential, as the ripple effects of these discussions touch consumers in Ohio, factories in Ontario, and boardrooms in Tokyo. President Donald Trump, fresh from securing a trade deal with the European Union, has turned his sights on China, brandishing tariffs as both weapon and olive branch. Leading the U.S. delegation is Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who arrives in Stockholm with a formidable agenda. Beijing must open its tightly controlled banking and investment sectors, reduce its reliance on Russian and Iranian oil, and boost purchases of American energy and agricultural goods. In return, the U.S. dangles selective concessions, potentially easing export controls on aerospace components and semiconductor tools or softening visa restrictions that have strained bilateral ties. But China, under the resolute leadership of President Xi Jinping, is not a passive player. Beijing holds a critical advantage. Its near monopoly on rare earth minerals, essential for everything from U.S. fighter jets to Silicon Valley's latest gadgets. Companies like MP Materials are scrambling to build domestic alternatives. But as trade analyst David Riedel notes, meaningful self-sufficiency is years away. China's leverage is not just economic. It's a geopolitical chokehold, and Beijing is poised to use it. The 90-day tariff truce, a hard-won pause in a trade war that once saw duties on Chinese goods soar to 145%, hangs in the balance. If no agreement is reached, tariffs could snap back to 55% or climb even higher, sending shockwaves through supply chains already stretched thin. The impact is already palpable. U.S. retailers, having burned through inventory stockpiled during earlier tariff pauses, now face shipments priced under the current 55% duties. With the holiday season looming, the cost is hitting store shelves. Electronics, toys, and apparel are all set to become pricier. Unlike in past years, companies are less willing or able to absorb these costs, passing them directly to consumers. A Yale study from July 2025 estimates that American households could face an additional $2,500 in annual expenses due to tariff-driven inflation. For Trump, the challenge is acute. He needs a deal that delivers a visible victory for his base while staving off voter backlash over rising prices, especially with key political milestones approaching in 2026. China, however, is playing a longer game. Beijing's negotiators, emboldened by Washington's recent treatment of allies, are digging in for a fight. The highly publicized Oval Office dressing down of Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky sent a clear message. Trump's diplomacy is personal. Volatile and unforgiving. For Xi Jinping, maintaining face is non-negotiable, and any deal must project strength. Chinese officials are reportedly demanding a communications ceasefire, a commitment from the Trump administration to refrain from negative public rhetoric as a prerequisite for progress. Behind the scenes, Beijing is accelerating its push for technological independence, funneling billions into domestic chip production to shield itself from future U.S. pressure. This is not a nation seeking compromise, but one aiming to dictate the terms of engagement, leveraging its economic muscle to reshape the global order. The Stockholm talks are not just about tariffs. They are a microcosm of a broader geopolitical shift, one that extends far beyond the U.S.-China rivalry. Trump's tariff-first strategy, defined by unilateral letters and shifting deadlines, has left allies reeling and questioning the foundations of their partnerships. Canada, a steadfast U.S. partner for decades, is navigating a particularly turbulent moment. On July 10, 2025, Trump announced a sweeping 35% tariff on all Canadian imports, effective August 1st. blindsiding Ottawa even as bilateral talks were underway. The move followed earlier duties on Canadian aluminum, steel, and copper, each escalation eroding a once unshakable bond. Trump's letters to Canada, eroding a once unshakable bond. Trump's letters to Canada, like those sent to other allies, end with a chilling caveat. Tariffs could shift depending on our relationship. For Prime Minister Mark Carney, the response has been strategic and restrained. Rather than retaliate publicly, Ottawa is quietly diversifying its economic ties, intensifying negotiations with ASEAN and signing a new free trade agreement in July. Canada also inked a defense and intelligence sharing pact with Japan, signaling a pivot toward the Indo-Pacific. Carney's approach is clear. Canada will not sacrifice long-term sovereignty for short-term relief. Japan, too, is adapting to Trump's unpredictable playbook. A 25% tariff on Japanese exports, announced days before Canada's, prompted a rare rebuke from Tokyo, which condemned the move as economic coercion. Yet Japan is not waiting for Washington to reconsider. Its economic ministers are forging deeper ties with Southeast Asia and Europe, building partnerships free of Trump's strings. The Indo-Pacific, once a strategic concept, is now a center of gravity for nations seeking stability. Canada is finalizing its free trade agreement with ASEAN, boosting LNG exports to Malaysia and positioning itself as a supplier of critical minerals to Asian markets. Japan, meanwhile, is strengthening defense ties with Vietnam and Indonesia, reinforcing its role as a regional anchor. These moves are not acts of defiance but of necessity. In a world where tariffs replace trust, diversification is not just smart, it's survival. Trump's trade policy, encapsulated in his promise of 90 deals in 90 days, has delivered not agreements but chaos. Letters announcing tariffs arrive without warning, threatening duties that could shift on a whim. For Canada and Japan, longtime pillars of America's global architecture, the erosion of trust is palpable. They are not turning hostile but pragmatic, building bridges beyond Washington. What's emerging is not anti-American but post-American. A world where allies value U.S. partnership but no longer anchor their futures to it. The Indo-Pacific, with its multilateral trade pacts and security agreements, is becoming a beacon of stability in a climate of uncertainty. Canada's LNG shipments to Malaysia and Japan's defense pacts with ASEAN nations are not mere transactions but steps toward a new economic and strategic order. The fallout from Trump's tariffs extends to the heart of North American economies. Carla Hills, the former U.S. trade representative who helped forge NAFTA, has sounded the alarm, calling the situation a self-inflicted wound. The analogy is stark. Targeting Canada feels like shooting your sibling in the heart. For decades, the U.S. and Canada were not just trading partners but collaborators, their supply chains interwoven in autos, manufacturing, and defense. Now, that foundation is cracking. Cross-border businesses from Michigan to Ontario are reeling from the unpredictability. The Yale study projects Canada's GDP could shrink by 2.1% due to the disruptions, while American households face rising costs. Small businesses in Michigan hesitate to hire, parts manufacturers in Ontario delay investments, and long-term contracts are put on hold as planning becomes guesswork. Trump promised control, but businesses are grappling with chaos. Canada's response, led by Carney and Industry Minister Melanie Joly, is a masterclass in strategic realignment. Weeks before the latest tariff escalation, Ottawa signed a landmark agreement with the European Union, encompassing not just trade but coordination on industrial policy and defense. This was no photo op. It was a pivot. Joly, spearheading economic diplomacy, is working to accelerate the ratification of the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, across Europe, even as 10 member states linger. Trade with the EU is expanding, and Canada is meeting with Berlin, Brussels, and Paris to build alternative supply chains that bypass the U.S. The message is unmistakable. Trump may close doors, but Canada is opening others. Ottawa is not just adjusting. It is repositioning structurally, forging a future less tethered to its southern neighbor. The U.S. is not just losing trade but credibility. Veteran negotiators like Hills warn that leadership hinges on consistency. Yet Trump's policy is anything but. Each escalation drives partners further away, not through grand betrayals, but through the steady drip of unpredictability. Canada's pivot to Europe and the Indo-Pacific is not a rejection of the U.S., but a recognition that reliance on Washington is no longer tenable. Europe, welcoming Ottawa's overtures, is eager to fill the void. Germany and France are exploring co-investment pathways with Canada, while Brussels is fast-tracking trade initiatives. If this trend holds, Trump's legacy may not be the manufacturing revival he envisioned, but the fragmentation of a continent-spanning alliance. The Stockholm talks, meanwhile, are a crucible for these broader dynamics. A headline deal may emerge, enough for Trump to claim victory and delay a tariff spike. But the deeper issues,